Hey guys, tonight we slip into an ancient meadow where sunlight tilts lazily across tall grasses, a place where you wander with sandals brushing soft petals and bees hum as if on repeat. You tilt your head back, watching clouds drift, and for a second you think, this is the safest moment in the world. Of course, you probably won't survive this, because the Greek myths have a habit of pulling rugs out from under your cozy picnic blanket. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and if you're awake enough, post your location and the local time in the comments. It's always wild to see where and when people are listening in. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stroll deeper into that blooming field, the one where Persephone, daughter of Demeter, finds herself picking flowers. Every bloom you touch feels heavier than it should, like the stems are tied to a secret. The grass bends oddly, and you almost miss the subtle trembling underneath, like someone has set a subway train running miles below. In fact, the Greeks didn't have subways, but if they did, Hades would have had the best underground system going. Only one stop though, straight to the afterlife. The flowers at your feet look perfectly innocent. Narcissus, violets, a few wild crocuses. You pause at the Narcissus, remembering how its name lingers in another myth. Narcissus staring at his reflection, totally forgetting brunch plans until he withered away. A flower born from vanity, now growing under Persephone's fingertips. You wonder if that's a clue, or just a bit of mythological recycling. Historians still argue whether these planted connections between myths were intentional symbolism, or just the result of centuries of storytellers improvising like stand-up comedians with better laurel wreaths. As you kneel, the sun feels warmer, but it's a trap. Like when your phone says it has 30% battery and then dies in 5 minutes. The ground shakes harder, a crack slicing the field, and you don't run. You just stand there, because in second-person narration, you're obligated to be stubborn. Out of that fissure rises a shadowy chariot, dark horses snorting with sparks. The driver is Hades himself, lord of the Underworld, making what is possibly the worst meet-cute entrance of all time. He doesn't shout, he doesn't wave, he just holds out a hand as if this is the most normal Uber pickup you've ever seen. You hesitate, obviously, but the story drags you along. Your sandals slip and suddenly you're swept up, wheels clattering against stone, flowers fluttering behind like confetti at a wedding you didn't RSVP to. The wind changes, your ears pop the way they do on airplanes. Only this descent has no tray table, no peanuts, just darkness spreading wider and wider. People in ancient Greece probably imagined this moment with a chill, because to them, death wasn't theoretical, it was constant. Life expectancy barely pushed past 35 in some places, which makes you realise, if you were alive then, you'd probably already be haunting your own myth. You glance once over your shoulder. The meadow shrinks to a thumbnail, light sliding away. The horse's hooves spark fire on the walls of the abyss, and your hands tighten on the edge of the chariot. You think of Demeter, Persephone's mother, goddess of grain and harvest. Somewhere above she still smiles, unaware her daughter is being dragged into eternal shadows. The strange part? This myth became the ancient explanation for why crops die each winter, why the earth grows cold. To them, stories weren't entertainment, they were climate science, just told with better costumes. Your body sways as the descent slows, cavern walls widening. You smell damp soil, but also something oddly sweet, like the whiff of a bakery you can't quite find on Google Maps. The air vibrates with a low hum, not machines, but voices, distant, endless, the murmur of countless shades waiting. And you, still clutching the story like a blanket, realise the meadow is gone. All that's left is the underworld opening its mouth to welcome you. A soft glow flickers ahead, lanterns burning with a pale flame that seems alive, almost sentient. You'll learn soon enough that Persephone doesn't just survive down here, she adapts. But right now, you're a stranger, tumbling between myth and history, nerves buzzing like power lines. Still, somewhere behind the fear, there's curiosity. Because what kind of seeds grow when planted in darkness? And why does Hades, of all gods, think a garden belongs here? For now you sit, back pressed against the seat of that chariot, watching sparks and shadows play across the tunnel walls. You're not asleep yet, but the story is already tugging your thoughts down, deeper, into roots and soil you didn't know could whisper. You feel the chariot grind to a halt, hooves clattering against stone, and the silence that follows is almost too perfect. The air still trembles as if it remembers the ride, but now it is hushed, waiting, like a theatre just before the curtain rises. Hades turns toward you, and in his hand gleams not a sword, not a crown, but something unexpectedly small. Seeds, glistening red, like drops of frozen sunset. He doesn't offer them with a flourish. He just holds them out as though he's showing you pocket change, yet the weight in the gesture is immense. These are not just snacks for the world's most awkward date. These are pomegranate seeds, the ones you've probably heard about, the ones that set the whole seasonal arrangement into motion. You stare, because let's be honest, who wouldn't hesitate when someone in a black robe offers you questionable fruit in a cave? The seeds look ordinary, but the underworld lighting makes them glow. You recall that in actual history, pomegranates were symbols of fertility in many Mediterranean cultures, prized for their abundance of jewel-like seeds. In ancient Persia, for instance, they were associated with eternal life. Greeks adopted some of that imagery, but with their own twist. Historians still argue whether the myth of Persephone's seeds was borrowed from older traditions, or invented as a uniquely Greek attempt to explain the harvest cycle. Either way, you can't escape the sense that every tiny bead contains more than just juice. It contains obligation. You lift one seed closer. The surface is smooth, cold at first, then oddly warm as if it has a pulse. You almost laugh. It's like fruit designed by Apple, sleek and minimalist, with a sinister subscription plan you didn't read the fine print for. If you swallow, the contract activates. You'll belong in part to this realm. If you refuse, the underworld remains only a stopover, not a home. You think of Persephone hesitating in the story, maybe brushing her fingers across her lips, maybe wondering whether eating would ease the gnawing in her stomach. In some versions, Hades tricks her, slipping the seeds in. In others, she knowingly eats, embracing the role fate hands her. Scholars still argue whether Persephone had agency in this moment, or whether it was a sly ambush hidden in the fine print of mythology. And you, sitting here, feel that tension. You want to believe she chose, but you can't shake the idea of a trap disguised as fruit. You take the seed into your mouth. The taste bursts open, sweet, tangy, and strange, like biting into both summer and autumn at once. It coats your tongue, and for a moment you're not sure if you're tasting flavour or memory. The pomegranate's sharp tang fades into something else. The echo of laughter in a field, the rustle of stalks of wheat, Demeter's hands guiding yours as you braided grass into crowns. It's all there in the juice. The seed isn't just food, it's a capsule of the world above, compressed and stored in edible form. You swallow, and the silence deepens. Around you, the cavern shifts. Lanterns flare brighter, the walls seem to lean closer, and suddenly you're more than a visitor. You're bound. The underworld recognizes you. It sighs in satisfaction, like a doorman checking off your name from an eternal guest list. One seed might have been enough, but Persephone eats more. You do too. 2, 3, each a tiny betrayal of the world you left. The odd part? You're not horrified. The seeds settle warmly inside you, as though they've been waiting for a place to rest. You think of how, in real horticultural terms, a seed only becomes what it's meant to be when it's buried in darkness. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Persephone's garden starts here, with seeds swallowed first before they ever touch soil. You lick your lips, and the last taste lingers bitter, like coffee grounds at the bottom of a cup. Your body feels heavier, but not unpleasantly so. It's the heaviness of a blanket on a winter's night, of commitments you can't wriggle out of but might secretly enjoy. Hades watches, silent, his eyes unreadable. You wonder if he feels victory, or simply relief, like someone who's been living alone for too long and now finally hears another set of footsteps echoing through the halls. You almost want to laugh again. This whole cosmic drama hinges on snacks. Forget epic battles, forget lightning bolts. What really decides fate in Greek myth is whether or not you're peckish. Still, the seeds glimmer in your palm. They are strange gifts. Tiny, edible contracts that say you now belong to both worlds. Above, the meadow still waits. Below, the soil is hungry. And in the middle, you sit, your future split into seasons like chapters of a story you can't put down. The chariot jolts again, pulling forward, deeper still. The seeds rattle in your hand like dice. Somewhere you realise the game has already been played, and you've already lost, or won, depending on how you see it. The chariot rolls onward, wheels scraping against stone that never seems to end. You feel the slope tilting downward, each turn pulling you further from the memory of sunlight. The air thickens as if you're breathing through layers of velvet, damp and slightly metallic, like rainwater left in an old bucket. You realise this is the descent, the long tunnel where every story insists mortals can't go, at least not without consequences. And here you are, feet planted, knuckles white against the edge of the cart. Lanterns flicker along the walls, though you never see anyone lighting them. They're not fire the way you know it. Instead, they glow with that eerie bluish flame that looks more like a screensaver than actual light. You think of how the Greeks described the underworld as a place beneath the earth, yet not fully tangible, a realm both physical and dreamlike. Historians still argue whether the Greeks really thought of it as a geographical location, somewhere you could, in theory, dig down to, or whether it was always symbolic, a psychological landscape of endings and memory. Either way, it's real enough when the wheels jolt over uneven ground. The tunnel stretches wider and you glimpse carved markings in the rock. They look like scratched-out graffiti, crude sketches of figures with arms outstretched. Perhaps shades tried to leave their mark here, or maybe priests chiselled warnings. Quirky detail. Some ancient Greeks actually left little inscribed tablets, katadesmoi, or curse tablets, in tombs, written with hopes of influencing the gods or sending messages to the dead. Imagine stuffing your wishes into the underworld like cosmic suggestion boxes. You run your fingers over the stone now, wondering what anonymous prayers still hum in these walls. The chariot slows again, hooves echoing like drums in an empty subway. The ground levels out, and for the first time you catch a glimpse of water. Black, sluggish, glinting with that same unnatural blue light. You realise you're skirting the banks of the Styx, the river of oaths. In myth, the gods themselves swore binding promises by its waters. Break an oath sworn on the Styx, and you risk losing your voice for years, maybe even immortality. Which makes you glance nervously at Hades, hoping he's keeping his end of the bargain, whatever that bargain is. You shift in your seat, trying not to think about how much deeper this road could go. The air cools further, almost crisp yet heavy at the same time. Each breath fills your lungs with weight. You hear voices now, murmurs that don't rise above whispers, a crowd hidden behind veils. They don't seem angry or welcoming, just curious. You imagine shades gathering at the edge of the path, leaning in as you pass like neighbours peering out windows when someone new moves into the block. The chariot veers slightly, jolting you upright. Ahead, a massive archway looms, carved with pillars that look like petrified trees. The stone is streaked with veins of silver, catching that lantern light in ghostly reflections. This is the gate to the deeper underworld, where Persephone will one day walk as queen. And for you, it's the doorway into a space you've only heard in bedtime stories and museum exhibits. You hesitate, but the horses don't. They trot through without so much as a snort. The moment you pass beneath the arch, the sound changes. It's not just echoes anymore. It's as if the air is an instrument, humming low notes that press against your chest. The descent feels complete. You're not falling anymore. You've landed, for better or worse, and still you can't help but notice the odd touches. Moss clings to stones, but it's silver, not green. Pebbles crunch underfoot, but they shine faintly, like discarded coins. You remember how families in Greece used to place coins in the mouth of the dead to pay Charon, the ferryman of the Styx. Maybe these glittering fragments are leftovers from souls who never made it across. Maybe this whole floor is paved with pocket change from eternity. You draw your cloak tighter, even though you're not cold. The chill here isn't physical, it's emotional, like standing in an empty house that still remembers its inhabitants. You glance at Hades again. He says nothing, but his grip on the reins is steady. He doesn't need to explain. You've already agreed, after all. The seeds are inside you, and that means this world is inside you now too. Behind you, the tunnel seals itself in memory. Ahead, dim torches and strange gardens await. For now, you remain on this path of descent, every step pulling you deeper into a myth where choice and fate blur. And as you move forward, you realize the descent isn't just physical, it's the sinking of time, the folding of your own thoughts into the soil of the underworld. The chariot finally halts, hooves scraping against stone that suddenly feels too polished, too intentional. You've left behind the ragged tunnels and dripping walls. Now the ground is tiled, smooth slabs that echo faintly when you step down. You pause at the threshold, because you've arrived not just anywhere but at the seat of Hades himself. A throne room carved from rock, massive and silent, rises before you. The ceiling arches impossibly high, like someone decided to build a cathedral underground, without worrying about construction permits. Shadows cling to corners, yet the centre glows with steady light. Torches mounted along the walls burn with that odd bluish-white fire again. You glance upward, noticing faint veins of crystal embedded in the ceiling, reflecting pinpoints of brightness like a fake constellation. Maybe it's Hades' version of stargazing, since the real sky doesn't shine down here. Historians still argue whether descriptions of his hall were ever meant to reflect an actual temple design, something Greeks might have imagined in rituals, or whether poets just freestyled spooky architecture for dramatic flair. At the far end sits the throne. It's not gilded, not jewelled, just solid black stone, heavy as silence itself. And there, seated in solemn stillness, is Hades. His robe drapes over the steps, simple but regal, nothing gaudy about it. You realise that's part of the intimidation. He doesn't need sparkle. The weight of eternity is bling enough. You shift uncomfortably, remembering how Greek myths often portrayed Hades not as evil, but as inevitable. A cosmic accountant keeping ledgers balanced, not a villain twirling his moustache. Your gaze shifts, though, to something strange. Tucked against one wall is a courtyard, almost an afterthought, where soil has been gathered into neat rectangular beds. It looks hilariously out of place, like someone installed a community garden in a haunted castle. The earth is dark, crumbly, breathing faint wisps of fog. You kneel by it, brushing the surface with your fingers. It's cool, but not lifeless. Somehow this soil feels awake, as if it recognizes that seeds belong here. The quirky detail: archaeologists once found offerings of grain and seeds in sanctuaries dedicated to Demeter and Persephone. These weren't snacks for wandering priests. They were ritual deposits, gifts to coax fertility from the gods. Imagine leaving behind your best handful of barley in hopes of better harvests. Now, here in the underworld, you realize the same symbolism plays out. Soil, seed, and the divine, just rearranged into a stranger setting. You stand again, glancing between the throne and the garden. The contrast makes you smile just a little. On one side, the Lord of the Dead presides over silence and stone. On the other, a patch of dirt quietly waits to be planted. It's like discovering your intimidating landlord also keeps a secret windowsill herb garden. Hades doesn't say much, but you notice his eyes shift toward that soil, as if checking whether you've seen it. He knows you have. And though he doesn't invite you outright, there's a sense that the space is meant for you. That maybe this Hall of Shadows wasn't complete until you arrived with seeds in your pocket, or in your stomach. You wander further into the room, feeling the weight of both grandeur and odd homeliness. The walls whisper faintly, as if stories are trapped in them. Some historians still argue whether Greek myths about the underworld reflect older Egyptian influences. After all, the Egyptians also believed in elaborate realms of the dead. The Greek version, though, feels less like a roadmap and more like a mood piece. Not turn left at the fifth gate, but brace yourself, it's going to feel weird. And standing here, you agree, it's definitely weird. You approach the soil bed again. There's no sun here, no rain, yet something about the earth suggests it doesn't need those things. It's fertile in its own strange way. You remember that seeds don't always require light to sprout. They can push upward in darkness, drawn by instincts deeper than reason. Maybe that's what Persephone will discover, that growth isn't limited to meadows and sunshine. It can happen even here, in the shadow of a throne. A sound interrupts your thoughts, a faint scratching like claws on stone. You glance back to see a small figure scurrying near the garden's edge. Not a monster, not a shade, but something smaller. A mouse, grey and trembling, nosing through the soil. You blink. Even here, life insists on finding a way. You chuckle under your breath, because if ancient poets ever mentioned underworld rodents, they left that part out. But you can't help feeling comforted. Where mice wander, so can seeds. You stand, brushing dirt from your hands, the throne at your back and the garden at your feet. And though nothing has grown yet, the soil's promise is enough. You realise this strange little courtyard will matter far more than the throne behind you. For while the throne represents endings, the soil hints at beginnings, even in the underworld. You kneel beside the neat rectangle of soil, that little island of darkness breathing slow and steady like a sleeping animal. You slide your fingers across the surface and feel a pulse you can't name. Maybe groundwater, maybe memory, maybe the low thrum of a realm that catalogues every footstep. You pull back your sleeve and reach for the seed, still cool in your palm, and you take a breath the way gardeners do before the first trowel bite of spring. Strange place for a garden, you think. But then again, you've always liked cosy contradictions. Hot tea on a hot day, a blanket under a ceiling fan, a garden under the earth. The soil gives easily. You press a thumbprint, then another, making little constellations of pockets, as if you're arranging stars where the sky forgot to shine. There's a hushed acoustics here. Every grain you move seems to click into a pattern, a subtle choreography like beads on a string. You remind yourself that Persephone is queen in training, but tonight she is, and you are, simply someone who plants. No thunder, no proclamations, just half-inch holes and careful spacing, like every farmer since forever. You whisper numbers to keep your rhythm, 1 seed here, 2 there. In the world above you'd look for the sun's angle, the signs of rain, the lazy loop of a bee. Down here you look for stillness, you look for a temperature that never changes. It's not lifeless, it's a kind of steady that your heart slowly learns to match. The underworld is a metronome, and your breath starts measuring itself to it. You pull a small stick from a rack leaning against the wall. You didn't see that before, but it feels like a marker, the sort of thing any decent garden would keep. You carve a line in the soil and realise you're smiling. Gardening does that, turns people into secret optimists. Even here, your hands act like the future is a real place. That's comedy, in a way. Not the big laugh kind, more the gentle, tired chuckle of someone who's just realised they bought heirloom seeds with names like Moonglow Nightshade Variant Probably Fine. You lean closer, speaking to the seeds like they're skittish birds. You don't have to do much, you murmur. Just be yourselves. It's possible you've reached the stage of sleepiness where you compliment legumes, and that's okay. The underworld is the perfect room for quiet reassurances. If anyone overhears, they'll pretend they didn't. Shades are pretty good at boundaries. A cool draft drifts through the courtyard, and you smell minerals and something faintly sweet, almost like crushed grape skins. You think of rituals, of the Eleusinian mysteries held near Athens, where initiates walked in torchlit processions for Demeter and Persephone. That's a mainstream historical fact. The Greeks kept those rites secret for centuries, so secret that Rome later adopted them, and yet we still don't have the full script. Historians still argue whether the mysteries promised a better afterlife or simply braided a community together so tightly that life itself felt transformed. Either way, the echoes of those processions brush your ears as you plant, a soft shuffling of sandals and a choir you can't quite hear. You press another seed down and think about the Pythagoreans, that philosophical squad who believed numbers were the bones of reality and, quirky tidbit incoming, swore off beans because they thought the humble legume had a weird relationship with souls. Maybe it was digestion. Maybe it was symbolism. Maybe they just had a bad stew one night and never recovered. Either way, you picture a Pythagorean peeking into this underworld garden like, no beans, right? And you resist the urge to label a row absolutely not beans. We checked. 3 light jokes quota means you can keep going. Gardening signs are the bumper stickers of soil. You're tempted to write live, laugh, photosynthesize, but the underworld prefers low-key fonts and no exclamation marks. You notice the soil's texture changing as you work it. In most gardens, you'd aim for loam, crumbly, balanced, not too sandy, not too clay-heavy. Here, the texture feels intentional, almost curated, like someone sifted it through centuries. Maybe the dead give up what they don't need, bits of longing, scraps of stories, and the soil eats those narratives and turns them into nutrients. You spread a thin layer over the seeds, patting each resting place with the back of your fingers. There you go. Blanket tucked, nightlight dimmed, sleep. A faint tremor ripples under your knees. Not an earthquake, more like footsteps in a house where the wood remembers each visitor. You glance toward the hall. No one stands there, and yet you feel seen, not judged, just observed, the way a theatre watches a rehearsal through the cracks of the curtain. You keep planting. The point is not perfection. The point is faith with dirt. You pause to drink from a clay cup sitting on the ledge. The water is cool and shockingly clear. You know from actual geology that aquifers and underground rivers run through limestone and basalt, filtering as they go. Ancient Greeks weren't strangers to springs that seemed to appear from nowhere. Some were sacred, some were tourist traps with better marble. Down here the water tastes like unspoken truths. You sip, press another seed, and listen to your heartbeat quiet. Without deciding to, you start humming. It's not a melody you recognise. It's more like a hum the soil itself suggests, a syllable-less lullaby. You've read about how gardeners sometimes talk to plants, play music for them, even swear that tomatoes prefer jazz. Is that science? Is that stubborn folklore? You don't mind. This is mythic botany now. You hum lower and the air hums back. Another row, then another. You keep the spacing generous because greed ruins gardens. You're not trying to make a buffet. You're trying to coax a conversation. Your thumbs ache pleasantly, a mortal sort of ache. The kind you'd ice later if you had ice. Instead, you rest your palms on the warm soil and let the warmth meet your pulse until both settle to the same sleepy tempo. You think of Demeter above, walking the shores of the world searching for her daughter, making droughts happen with every unanswered question. That's the terrifying power of grief. Entire economies bend around it. In old harvest calendars, the months were choreographed by what wheat wanted. When Demeter mourned, the world learned winter. You smooth the soil and picture her hands, quick, practiced, the way experienced farmers can judge seed depth by the way a finger leaves a mark. You try to match that competence, and there's comfort in pretending you can. You stand to stretch, and the blue-white torches bow a fraction, or maybe the room shifts light like an eye adjusting. Your knees are dusted black, your nails lined silver with whatever mineral threads run through this earth, and you realise something tender. You've made yourself at home here without an announcement. You didn't need a coronet. You needed a trowel and time. For a blink you're tempted to check your work like a nervous baker, lift the soil, peek at the seed, whisper, "You good?" But you stop. Snooping on seeds is the gardener's equivalent of opening the oven door too soon. Also, as any sleep-deprived plant parent knows, nothing grows faster because you stare at it. It's a plant, not a software update. That's joke number 2, and your inner algorithm is pleased. You make labels with the stick, simple scratches you'll recognise later. Not names, not yet. You're not sure what will rise here. Maybe pale things that store moonlight. Maybe vines that refuse to climb, choosing to drape themselves like soft curtains over the edge of the bed. You mark the corners and step back. A soft rattle whispers from the wall rack again. You glance over and see a coil of twine, a shallow bowl, a small rake. The basics, politely assembled. No note attached, which is very on-brand for hosts who pretend not to care while obviously caring. You leave them where they are. You'll use them soon enough, but that's tomorrow night energy. Tonight was for first contact. Across the room, the throne stays quiet. You feel its gravity but not its demand. This place runs on rituals, some loud, most silent. Planting belongs to the silent class. You lean your hip against the garden frame, a routine gesture in an unroutine place, and the wood, or whatever passes for wood here, warms under you. You listen again to dripping somewhere far away, to the hush of a long corridor, to the little mammal sounds of a realm that pretends it has no mammals. One more thought surfaces, walking carefully. In some tellings, Persephone ate 6 seeds, in others 3, or even 1. Historians still argue whether variations came from regional cults or poetic flair. You've tucked more than a few into the soil tonight, and you feel strangely fine about the math. Seasons are elastic in stories. What matters is the loop, the leaving and returning, and this garden is your tiny pulley system, your way to draw life up from below when the world above goes thin. You brush your hands, let the dust fall back where it belongs. The garden isn't finished, but it is begun, and begins are underrated. You look at your neat rows in their sleep, at the faint shimmer that rides the soil like breath on a window. and you let the room exhale with you. Somewhere a mouse agrees with a tiny squeak, which translated probably says, "Nice spacing." Joke 3 lands, soft as a seed coat. You step back into the wider hall, but not far. The courtyard keeps you near, a small gravity. You'll come again. Darkness requires tending like anything else. Stirring, checking, a patient hand. For now you leave the seeds to dream of rupturing, of that first victorious crack where a root ventures down and a pale stem nudges up, both directions at once, like a traveller who suddenly realises the road was home the whole time. You wake, if you ever slept at all, to a faint glow where you remember only dark soil. At first you think it's lantern light, but no, the torches haven't changed. It's the bed itself. The garden is breathing back. You crouch low, eyes adjusting, and see tiny filaments pushing upward, translucent stems trembling as though shy about their debut. They quiver, then stiffen, then unfurl petals that glow faintly, not like fire, but like stars seen through mist. The air smells different now. Sweet, a little like honey watered down mixed with minerals. You lean closer and the petals tilt toward you, though there is no sun to chase. They move, but not toward light, toward presence, toward witness. You laugh softly, because this is the opposite of a normal garden. Above ground, plants bend for photons. Down here, they bend for company. One blossom opens fully and you swear you hear a faint note, like a wine glass tapped by accident. Sound and light tangle together. You wonder if this is what poets meant when they spoke of Persephone's realm, a place where things didn't die but changed into versions that refused to match surface logic. Historians still argue whether these myths were intended to comfort people about death or terrify them into piety. As you watch the garden glow, you lean toward comfort. Death here is not emptiness, it's transformation with a neon accent, the quirky tidbit. Some ancient texts mention flowers thought to grow only in cemeteries, plants whose seeds seem to sprout mysteriously in soil enriched by offerings and grief. A few scholars suggest early Greeks saw such blooms, and decided the underworld itself must harbour gardens. So when you watch these ghostly petals rise, you're continuing that long line of humans who believe blossoms love drama. You reach out and hover your hand above one bloom. Warmth radiates, not hot, but steady, like the back of a cat napping on a radiator. The stem leans toward your fingers and you pull back, suddenly protective. You don't want to bruise it, don't want to test whether fragile can mean eternal. The flower doesn't mind. It trembles once, then settles, pulsing its quiet light like a night light for wandering shades. A faint rustle behind you makes you turn. Several spirits have gathered at the edge of the courtyard, not daring to cross the invisible threshold. They peer with wide, faintly glowing eyes, murmuring to each other. You catch fragments, astonishment, curiosity, maybe envy. They've been here for centuries, maybe longer, with no change but the shuffle of endless time. And now something grows. For them, that's headline news. You wave because politeness doesn't expire, and they bow slightly before drifting back. You smile, realizing your garden has fans. Not bad for a place without sunlight. You lean on the frame, watching more sprouts push through. Some curl upward in spirals, others stretch like nervous dancers, and a few refuse to stand at all, spreading sideways like spilled ink. None of them look ordinary, but all look alive. You think of real-world fungi glowing in caves, foxfire, bioluminescence that pioneers used as natural lanterns. Maybe this myth simply magnifies that science, wrapping it in story. And honestly, if you'd ever seen mushrooms lighting a forest floor, you'd agree it's basically magic. The throne looms behind you, silent witness. You glance back, expecting judgment, but Hades doesn't move. He stays on his seat, gaze turned outward, as if pretending he hasn't noticed his hall now flickers with pale blossoms. His stillness is almost comical, like a host insisting they don't care about your interior design, while secretly rearranging throw pillows when you're not looking. The flowers keep unfurling row by row. You count 7 distinct colours of glow, none resembling the rainbow you know. More like new categories: silver green, violet black, frost gold. You whisper their names under your breath, though no one else will record them. That's part of the joy. You're cataloguing something ephemeral, a story only alive while you tell it. You press your palms together, suddenly aware of how odd it feels to be proud here, Pride isn't supposed to belong in the underworld, yet it blooms alongside the petals, curling gently around your ribs. You grin, sleepy and dazed, because honestly, glowing flowers in the land of the dead, that's peak ambience. Airbnb could never. Joke quota check. Don't worry, 2 more are coming. The spirits return again, braver now. One drifts forward, translucent hands reaching toward the blossoms. The flower doesn't wilt, doesn't recoil. It leans in, pressing its light into the shade's palm. For the briefest moment, the shade looks more solid, colour brushing their cheeks, form tightening. You gasp. The flower gave a fragment of life back. The shade sighs, grateful, and lets go. The bloom trembles but stays upright. You think, maybe this garden isn't just decoration. Maybe it's medicine. Above, Demeter still rages, calling for her daughter, starving fields of wheat, leaving mortals to scramble for stored grain. That's the historical layer. Famines in early Greece, when winters or wars cut supplies, were catastrophic. People explained them with stories, like Demeter's grief. You, kneeling here, see the other half of the myth. The daughter adapting, creating new food where none should exist. The garden shivers once more, then stills. Dozens of blossoms now glow, lighting the courtyard in a shifting, dreamlike haze. You step back, rubbing soil from your palms, and realise you've done something irreversible. You've turned the underworld into a greenhouse, and whether Hades admits it or not, he needed this. The shades needed this. Even you needed this. You yawn, suddenly heavy, the flowers pulsing like nightlights urging you to drift. You smile, whisper goodnight, and let the glow paint your eyelids in patterns you'll never forget. The glow from your garden softens like a nightlight with manners, and in that hush you hear it. A faint sifting far above, as if someone is combing the sky with a wide wooden rake. You hold still, elbows on the garden frame, and the sound resolves into something you know without knowing. Grainheads brushing one another in a wind you can no longer feel. You close your eyes, and there she is, Demeter, moving along the bright world like weather with a purpose, her sandals marking furrows, her skirt catching husks and sunlight. The underworld doesn't do breezes, not really, but it borrows echoes like a library that forgot to set due dates. The blossoms lean toward the sound. It isn't light they crave, it's story. Their pale petals tilt to a memory of summer, and you tilt with them. In your throat is the sensation of bread warm from an oven, and in your nose the tang of crushed barley. The tug is physical. Your ribs try to widen for a breath that belongs to another realm. You steady yourself by the little rake Hades stashed for you, pretending it isn't a kindness, same as always, and you whisper, I know. I miss her too. Far above, a temple bell rings the way bronze remembers thunder. You aren't supposed to hear that from down here, but rules loosen when a mother is searching. The sound is a lucis in your bones, the sanctuary outside Athens where year after year initiates walked by torchlight for Demeter and for you. Mainstream history time, the Homeric hymn to Demeter, composed around the 7th or 6th century BCE, tells how your mother's grief withered the fields until the gods negotiated your return. The Eleusinian mysteries sprang from that hymn's heartbeat, drawing Greeks and later Romans to seek a gentler understanding of death. The bell's note fades into your garden like water poured onto dark earth, and the petals drink it. You sit on the low curb of the bed, fingertips pressing little half-moons into the wood. A mouse, the same bold inspector from earlier you suspect, pokes its nose from beneath the frame, scouts the path, then decides you're trustworthy enough to ignore. It hops onto the soil, leaving perfect seed-sized footprints between the sprouting stems. You grin. If Demeter could see this, she'd pretend to be scandalized, and then secretly stash a crumb in the corner. That's how harvest mothers love. Stern in public, generous when no one's looking. Another sound slips down the stone corridors. A woman's low chant, carried on distances that shouldn't carry anything. You can't make out the words, but the repetition is unmistakable, the kind of rhythm that keeps hands busy and spirits steady. You picture the Thesmophoria, women's autumn festival for Demeter, when wives left home to camp on a hillside, trading household clatter for sacred mischief. Quirky tidbit alert. Ancient sources say they lowered offerings, including piglets, into pits, and later retrieved the decayed remains to mix into fields, a pungent compost of hope. You wrinkle your nose out of sympathy and half-laugh because, frankly, gardeners have always been brave. Historians still argue whether those rites were primarily symbolic, agricultural science in disguise, or a bit of both. Ritual as fertilizer, fertilizer as ritual. The chant swells, and your blossoms answer with a slow brightening, as if the syllables polish them. You look toward the throne. Hades pretends not to hear what you hear. One elbow on the armrest, gaze a little too fixed on the far wall, he occupies the delicate art of acting unaffected. But the light from your bed has wandered across the floor and climbed 2 steps up the dais, and it puddles at his feet in a way even kings must notice. You watch the tiniest shift in his shoulders that admits the obvious. There is weather down here now, you think. It's just arriving as music and memory instead of rain. Your palms itch. They want to hold wheat again, to feel the rasp of awn against skin and the little snap when a kernel breaks free. In a flash, the Underworld gives you a draft of that feeling, not real grain, but the tactile dream of it, and you savour the way it chases the chill from your wrists. Memory is a crop with a long root. Perhaps that's why the pomegranate bound you so easily. It's fruit with a secret basement, each seed a little cellar for yesterday. You speak aloud without meaning to. She's walking the roads, you say, as if someone asked. Counting days in the tracks of oxen. Bargaining with drought. Bargaining with everyone. The words settle on the soil like a dusting of ash. The garden absorbs them, the way healthy earth absorbs everything it's given. Footsteps, weather, tears, jokes muttered at dusk when the roos go crooked. You think of the tools on their rack, of your stick-scratched labels, of the coil of twine waiting like a patient thought, and for a moment you feel domestic in a throne room. That's funny, in a quiet way. HGTV, Tartarus Edition. You imagine the episode title, Small Space, Big Gloom, Bold Accent Garden. That's one joke. Your blossoms blink as if pleased with themselves. From a distant corridor comes a sound like a sickle set down on stone. Not harsh, careful. Anyone who has harvested knows that particular ring, the moment metal exhales after work. It arrives braided with the smell of chaff and the itch of dust on your throat. You cough once, smiling, because the body remembers labour even when the hands are clean. One shade drifts nearer, soot-grey and curious, and you take the little rake to groom a patch of soil as example. The shade watches, then mimics the motion in the air as if planting invisible seeds. You nod. Teaching without words, a skill every gardener learns when the neighbour's cat keeps misunderstanding the off-limits bed. Another echo, sandals slapping whetstone, shoreline close by. Demeter has moved to the coasts, calling to fishermen who watch the horizon like an oracle. You picture the port of Piraeus in its bustling days, amphorae clinking, gossip ricocheting off colonnades. A practical fact, grain import was a lifeline for classical Athens. Shipments from the Black Sea could make or break the city's pantry. When supply faltered, politics snarled. You taste brine, and your underworld garden brightens a cool blue, as if ocean light could be borrowed and wrung out like a cloth. You miss the surface unexpectedly, which is ridiculous for someone seated in front of a glow-in-the-dark miracle bed. Still, you miss the impolite heat of July, the way cicadas announce themselves with zero social restraint, the way a storm builds a rumour for hours and then backs it up with rain. You think of the sunscreen experiments you've seen in museum notes, the olive oil glossed onto skin in ancient gymnasia, sometimes mixed with resin or ash. You thank every star, real and fake, that no one offered you the Egyptian crocodile dung blend. Glamour has limits. The blossoms chuckle. No, really? One emits a tiny chime that can only be laughter. That's joke 2. The mouse approves with whiskers. Will she find me? You ask the air, and the air answers with a draft that smells like hearth soot and bread. The conversation enders of homes everywhere. It isn't a yes, and it isn't a no. It's the kind of answer seasons give. Wait, then watch. You lay your palm flat on the bed and feel little pulses in the root zone, a tap code your body starts to understand. Root down, shoot up, hold and release, sleep and wake. The simplest instructions, perfect for myths and for Tuesdays. You let your breathing follow, lengthening until the edges of the hall soften. One of the shades hums a descending note. Ah, Eleusis again, or maybe a lullaby learned before they crossed, and you add your own line beneath it like a bass string. The garden listens and steadies. There's a new harmony here, built on faraway bells and the memory of scythes. You picture Demeter leaning over a field at day's end, palm on the ground the way yours is now, confirming the world is still holding. You see her jaw set, her eyes refusing to admit the red rim. She doesn't do collapse, she does bargaining as craft. The gods will meet her at the table soon enough. Historians still argue whether the myth encodes an older Near Eastern pattern of dying and rising deities, or whether it emerges locally from Greek agrarian life. But in either case, the logic is the same. Absence needs an answer. Your garden is part of that answer, soft and stubborn. The blossoms dim a fraction, not fading, resting. You tuck a stray sprout back toward the soil, a gesture you invented and the plant kindly tolerates. She'll hear you, you tell the bed, and maybe you mean you. Somewhere above, a threshing floor lifts dust into a gold cloud, and the faintest rivulet of that brightness finds its way down, shivering the crystals in the ceiling. This realm keeps what it receives, so does the other one. Between them, you're the hinge, seeds in the stomach, hands in the soil, ears catching echoes meant for sky. Behind you, Hades shifts again, almost imperceptibly. You don't turn. You let him have the dignity of pretending he's part of the furniture. That's joke 3, whispered kindly. Your mouse yawns like a small bellows. The shade at the edge of the bed pats the air once more as if smoothing a blanket. The room says shh without saying shh. You rest your cheek briefly on your crossed arms and listen for the next echo. When it comes, it will come as simple things do. A footstep, a grain stalk tapping another, the tiny applause of leaves. You'll catch it, and your garden will translate. That is how you will wait for her. That is how the underworld will learn patience that isn't just endurance, but expectation with a heartbeat. The garden's glow softens into a kind of twilight haze, and in that gauzy half-light you hear it. The softest murmur, like wind threading through reeds, but the air down here never moves. You pause, spine prickling, and realise the sound isn't air at all. It's voices. The shades have gathered again. Not a few curious souls this time, but dozens, maybe hundreds, drifting along the perimeter of the courtyard. Their outlines waver, translucent forms crowded shoulder to shoulder, as if a fence had been built from memory, and they all leaned against it at once. You rest a hand on the soil, steadying yourself. The voices rise and fall like a tide, not shouting, not even speaking clearly, just whispering fragments. How did you coax it? Why does it shine? Does it remember, see? Will it feed us? What is the scent of a petal like when it's touched by someone alive? The questions braid together, and you have the dizzying sensation of standing in the middle of a library where every book has decided to read itself aloud at once. You breathe slowly, letting the whispers wash through you. Most of the shades keep their distance, but one drifts closer, hovering just beyond the invisible boundary. Its face flickers in and out, features refusing to settle. When it leans forward, the garden responds. The blossoms glow brighter, stems stretching toward it like children reaching for a parent returning from work. The shade extends a trembling hand, pauses, then pulls back, afraid. You find your voice before you realise you're speaking. It's okay, you say softly. They're meant for you too. The shade quivers as though startled by permission. Slowly it stretches again, fingertips brushing a silver-green bloom. The flower answers with a pulse of light, and for one fragile heartbeat the shade looks whole, solid, coloured, almost breathing. Then it fades back, whispering thanks in a voice so faint you feel it more in your bones than your ears. A ripple goes through the crowd, longing or hunger, all tangled. You hear scraps of stories, farmers remembering olive groves, children recalling the squeak of leather sandals, elders whispering prayers they forgot to finish. It's messy, a cacophony of unfinished lives. Historians still argue whether Greek views of the underworld were uniformly grim, or whether some traditions allowed for gentler, even hopeful continuations. Standing here, you lean toward the hopeful version. These whispers don't want punishment, they want recognition. You think of quirky burial customs. Archaeologists have found small terracotta figurines buried with the dead, toys or companions for eternity. One even looked like a tiny horse with a comically oversized head. maybe meant to make the journey less lonely. You imagine these shades carrying similar relics in their voices. The last laugh they had, the taste of figs, the memory of sunlight on a stone bench. And here they are, crowding your little garden, hoping it can translate those relics into something they can hold again. The whispers thicken, weaving into a drone that buzzes just under hearing. It makes the soil hum. The sprouts tremble as if the roots below are reacting to the sound, drinking it in like fertilizer. You realise the shades aren't just curious, they're feeding your garden with memory, with scraps of themselves. Roots press deeper, stems stiffen, blossoms flare. It's an ecosystem of the forgotten, and you're the awkward gardener tasked with tending it. You glance back at the throne. Hades still watches from his unmoving seat, jaw set, pretending he's not intrigued. His knuckles tighten slightly on the armrest. You imagine he's debating whether this is harmless or dangerous, whether letting shades find solace in flowers is a breach of cosmic HR policy. Joke one lands. You can almost picture him filing an Underworld workplace complaint. Subject created unsanctioned morale booster. Recommend observation and minimal eye contact. One shade, bolder than the rest, speaks clearly enough to catch. Do they remember the sun? It asks, voice shaking. You touch a frost gold blossom and tilt it toward the spirit. Not the sun, you answer gently, but they remember warmth. The shade nods, satisfied, and drifts back into the crowd. The others echo faintly, repeating the word warmth like a mantra. The soil shivers as if approving the vocabulary choice. You realise the garden is becoming a kind of shrine, not for gods, but for these wandering souls. They don't worship, they participate. Every whisper is a kind of offering. It reminds you of those ancient curse tablets again, where words scratched into lead were meant to carry force into the underworld. But here, the shades are etching on air, and the blossoms are the tablets. You almost laugh. Quirky mythic stationery, but prettier. That's joke 2. The crowd grows thicker, shadows layering on shadows until the edges of the courtyard blur. The blossoms glow harder to compensate, painting the space with their eerie bioluminescence. You find yourself oddly calm, because what are whispers if not the lullabies of the dead? They're not threatening. They're insistent, yes, but insistent the way thirsty mouths insist on water. You can handle thirst. You lean back, arms crossed loosely, and address them. I'll keep tending it, you promise. But you have to be patient. Gardens don't grow faster just because you hover. The mouse pokes its head up again, squeaking in what you swear sounds like laughter at your gardener sass. That's joke 3. Gardeners everywhere know that impatient hovering kills vibes more efficiently than frost. The shades murmur, some amused, some solemn, all acknowledging. The whispers begin to recede, not gone but gentler, fading into the background like the soft buzz of cicadas on a hot night. The blossoms sway once more, settling into their own rhythm. You exhale, long and slow, realizing your little courtyard has become a meeting ground between silence and speech, absence and presence. You rest your hand against the soil one last time, feeling it pulse with borrowed stories. Sleep, you whisper to the roots. And maybe, just maybe, the shades do too. The whispers thin like fog lifting from a field at dawn, though there is no dawn here, only endless dusk. You stretch your legs and roll your shoulders, half expecting the shades to keep their vigil. Instead, you notice something else. On the edge of the courtyard, beside the rack of tools, a new object waits. You swear it wasn't there before. A shallow jar. Clay mottled with mineral stains, filled with what looks suspiciously like compost. You grin, because who else but Hades would leave you Underworld starter fertilizer and then act like it just appeared naturally? You glance toward the throne. He's in his usual pose, chin tilted, gaze fixed on a nothing point far away. He doesn't move, but the tiniest twitch at the corner of his mouth betrays him. You stifle a laugh. This is the same man who controls legions of shades, and yet he can't bring himself to say, "Here, I thought you might need this." Instead, he plants jars like a passive-aggressive roommate. You pick it up, sniffing. The smell is earthy with a tang you can't place. Half moss, half lightning. Maybe it's ground-up obsidian, or maybe it's the byproduct of centuries of regret. Either way, the soil perks when you sprinkle a little across the rows. The sprouts shiver and glow brighter, clearly pleased. You nod approvingly and say aloud, "Nice touch." Across the hall, Hades pretends to cough into his hand, which might be the underworld equivalent of blushing. You can't help but think of quirky agricultural hacks from the world above. The Romans swore by fish heads buried beneath vines, while the Greeks sometimes poured wine into furrows as an offering to Dionysus. Historians still argue whether those wine offerings were practical fertilization or pure ceremony, but either way, you're amused to imagine a tipsy vineyard. Here, though, your garden thrives on jars of mystery mulch supplied by a king too proud to admit he shops local. You work the compost in with the little rake, careful not to disturb the roots. The soil exhales a faint warmth, and the blossoms answer with a deeper glow, as if someone turned up their brightness settings. The shades drift closer again, but this time they don't whisper. They just watch, silent and reverent, as if the act of tending is more miraculous than the plants themselves. You feel their gaze steady on your hands, and oddly it doesn't bother you. Gardening has always been a public secret, mundane work that feels holy when witnessed. You lean back on your heels, wiping your palms against your robe, and murmur, "Thanks, I guess," in Hades' direction. He doesn't answer. Instead, you hear the faint scrape of something else shifting near the throne. When you glance, you spot another gift tucked discreetly on the lower step, a coil of woven reeds, perfect for binding stems. He's doubling down on his awkward kindness. You almost laugh outright. Joke 1. Hades is basically the world's most introverted hardware store, sneaking supplies into your basket without eye contact. You mutter, "You know you could just talk to me," but the silence holds. Still, the gifts keep appearing. You realise he isn't ignoring you. This is his version of speaking. The thought softens you. You think of Demeter above, who gives abundantly but loudly. She shouts. She weeps. She withholds harvests until the world obeys. Hades gives in silence, gifts hidden in shadows, kindness disguised as indifference. Both styles somehow are love languages, though one is easier to read. Historians still argue whether Hades and Persephone's marriage was abduction, consent, or something stranger in between. As you kneel in this garden, you suspect the truth was complicated. Gods and humans alike struggle to express what they feel. The blossoms lean toward the reed coil, as if recognizing its purpose. You take it in hand, winding a sprout gently, securing it so it won't topple. The motion is soothing, like braiding hair. You wonder if Demeter ever braided Persephone's when she was small, if her fingers were as steady as yours now. The thought stings, tender and bitter-sweet, but you don't pull away. The garden hums in sympathy, and even the shades seem to sigh. Another gift arrives without fanfare. A small bowl of water set neatly on the tool rack. You dip your fingers, sprinkle droplets across the soil. They hiss faintly, sinking in, steam rising like incense. You know in the real world, ancient farmers often poured libations, wine, oil, honey, into furrows, tiny sacrifices to coax fertility. Maybe this water is the Underworld's version, condensed from the Styx itself. You picture an ancient priest lowering a jug into the river, muttering oaths, and you shiver at the thought of its taste. The plants respond instantly, stretching higher, leaves unfurling wider, light brightening like dawn arriving in miniature. The shades step back, murmuring awe, and for once even Hades' stillness wavers. His shoulders loosen, his gaze drops briefly to the garden. He doesn't smile, but he doesn't need to. The air itself feels warmer. You chuckle softly, brushing dirt from your hands. Joke 2. The Underworld is basically one passive-aggressive roommate and a greenhouse project. The mouse squeaks agreement. You sit cross-legged now, staring at your patch of earth transformed into something radiant. The throne room doesn't look so cold anymore. Shadows cling less tightly. Even the stone vanes overhead sparkle with borrowed light. You realise this garden is changing the architecture. Not physically, but atmospherically. Where once there was only echo, now there is presence. Hades shifts again, just barely, and this time you decide to throw him a lifeline. "Thank you," you say clearly without irony. The silence hangs heavy, and then finally his voice, low, gravelly, unused to casual tones. They grow well. That's it. No more, no less. But it's enough. You smile because in this realm, a sentence like that is basically a standing ovation. Joke 3 lands, quiet as a flower blooming. Hades just left you a 5-star Yelp review without knowing it. The shades settle back into the dark, murmuring softly as if lulled by the exchange. You pat the soil one last time, your heart unexpectedly lighter. Perhaps kindness here must arrive sideways, through jars, bowls, coils, and silence, but it arrives nonetheless. And in a land where everything is supposed to end, that sideways kindness feels like the beginning of something stubbornly alive. You notice the first fruits almost by accident, fat droplets pendant from the bioluminescent vines like ornaments a careful hand forgot to pack away after a holiday. They're not pomegranates. Those were the contract. These are the garden's reply. Small globes and pods and lantern-shaped capsules, each with a faint aura that hums in a slightly different key. You rake your fingers through the air and feel pitches change. Ting, ton, tinier ting, like testing glasses on a shelf for the one that sings. The mouse sits up on its haunches, whiskers flared, equal parts food critic and fire marshal. You pick one. It's cool, weightless in the palm, almost buoyant, as if it can't quite decide whether to obey gravity. The surface feels like a fig skin that learned moonlight. You raise it toward your mouth and hesitate because you've learned the Underworld runs on fine print. Still, the garden has been honest with you so far. You bite. Flavour floods in, not sweet or tart, but familiar. The taste is wheat dust and warm stone, Demeter's hands steadying yours as you try to braid a stork crown without snapping it. Your chest stutters, memory unfurls like a flag. You see the threshold of a cottage with a vine trained along it. Hear a woman laugh at a joke you told badly. Feel the midday nap of summer pressing you down in kindness. You swallow, and the memory dims. But it doesn't vanish. It sits, gentle and reachable, like a book left open on the table. You try another fruit, a pear-shaped pod with a smoky sheen. This one tastes like spring water and iron, like the first time you scraped a knee and someone dabbed it with wine and said, "There, that's life entering." You half smile, half wince. The memory is yours and also not, like everything down here, personal and universal at once. The shades murmur from the edge, hungry for the idea of tasting a day again. You hold up your hand. Wait. Let me see what each does. They hush, trusting your curiosity will make room for theirs. You taste a third, a little lantern you crack open with a thumbnail. The scent that escapes is rain on dust. On your tongue, it becomes the first story you ever loved, the one about a fisherman who bargains with a gull for the wind. You don't remember all the details, the fruit doesn't either, but the feeling returns, the hush of being held by a tail. You breathe out, shaky, and the blossoms lean in as if to anchor you. It makes a sneaky kind of sense. Plants in the upper world carry weather and soil in their fibres, terroir they call it in the vineyards, the taste of place. These fruits carry terroir of time. Each bite unlocks a drawer you'd forgotten you built. You glance at Hades' throne. He watches not you, but the line of shades, measuring their ache. His silence feels less awkward now, more careful. The coil of reeds on the step behind him has shifted closer, as if it shuffled its own way to be near in case you need tying off for trellises, another of his sideways gifts. You slice a fruit and offer a sliver to the nearest shade. It takes the morsel in both hands, as if receiving communion, and brings it toward its mouth. The light inside the shade intensifies, rippling outward like a small aurora. For a breathtaking instant, colour returns, a brown eye freckled with gold, a birthmark on a cheek, the exact curve of someone who once grinned often. Then the light softens and the shade sighs. "It was my mother's song," they whisper. You nod. Another shade steps forward, waiting. You share, measuring portions with the same ritual care you used for seed spacing. The mouse patrols the edge like an overzealous maître d', which is joke one. You resist the urge to ask it about the wait list. A practical thought flickers. You should label these fruits. You make little scratches with your stick. Wheat memory, first story, iron and spring. Names that will make you smile when you're tired. You set some aside. Food here has rules, and you're not about to speedrun a tasting menu that tangles your entire life in a single sitting. You sip water from the Underworld bowl, letting the taste clear your mouth like an altar boy rinsing the chalice between prayers. Mainstream fact drifts in as you work. The Greeks knew well that food could carry ritual power. The kykion, The barley and mint drink of the Eleusinian mysteries was sipped by initiates during the rites tied to Demeter and you. Its exact recipe is lost, but ancient texts insist on its centrality, a shared cup that bridged ordinary and sacred. Some scholars, building on R. Gordon Wasson and Albert Hoffman's proposals, have suggested the kykeon might sometimes have been laced with ergot from barley, a psychoactive fungus that could alter perception. Historians still argue whether that was pharmacology on purpose, an accidental bonus, or a modern projection. You think about your fruits and smile. Whatever the cup held, people have long trusted plants to ferry them over thresholds. A quirky tidbit chimes in from the coastlines of the Black Sea. Mad honey. Ancient writers like Xenophon told how soldiers once ate honey made from rhododendron nectar and promptly staggered, nauseated, of vision spinning. Local beekeepers still bottle that wild stuff today. You shiver theatrically. Not on the menu, you tell the mouse, in case it's considering starting an artisanal shop. The mouse looks offended as if it had already designed labels. Joke 2 lands with whisker indignation. You try a fourth fruit, a dusky orb with faint constellations speckled on its skin. It tastes like a door opening. No, really, like the click of a latch, the rush of a draft, the sound a hinge makes when it remembers it was made to move. A memory rises that isn't personal, but archetypal. Walking out of a childhood house for the last time, not looking back until the corner, then looking back anyway. You murmur, "Oh," and several shades echo, "Oh," because some feelings are group projects. You could get addicted to this. You could stand here and eat your whole history, let it pour through you until you blur into sweetness. You don't. You're a gardener, and gardeners ration joy the way they ration water in a dry month. Enough to sustain, never so much that it drowns. You arrange the fruits in a shallow bowl, another gift that just happens to be waiting, dividing them by tone, the warm ones that taste like bread and sunlit wood, the cool ones that taste like iron and rain, the bright ones that taste like beginnings, the soft ones that taste like endings softened into blankets. You bring a warm fruit to Hades without thinking. He doesn't reach for it. He looks at you quietly until your extended hand starts to tremble from the absurdity of feeding a god. Then he takes it, more gently than you expect, and holds it a long moment before biting. His eyes shutter halfway, an almost blink, an almost vulnerability, and when he swallows you feel the room give a little. "Laurel smoke," he says, voice low, surprised, and reads by a river. He sets the rest on the armrest, a king unsure how to thank without revealing he needed the taste. You spare him and turn back to the shades. You discover limits. A fruit that tastes like winter light makes your fingers ache as if they carried water pails for miles. A fruit that tastes like festival nights leaves you giddy and useless for a minute, laughing at nothing, the blossoms chiming along like silver spoons on a table edge. Joke 3. If the Underworld ever opens a tapas bar, you'll need a bouncer and a nap room. You pause, steady, and begin a ritual. For every fruit sampled, a moment of stillness with your palm on the soil, letting roots learn you again, reminding yourself that memory is sweetest when paired with presence. The shades learn the rhythm too. Taste, pause, breathe. Your garden brightens not in spikes but in pulses, an aurora that respects the dark between waves. You clean the knife on a cloth, thanks again, mysterious supply chain, and tuck the bowl onto the bed's corner where the mouse can't stage a heist. You catch yourself grinning. Who knew the land of the dead would teach portion control with such kindness? You hear Demeter's echo, the clink of a cup, the rustle of barley, a scythe set down with care. Above and below the same lesson. Eat enough to remember. Leave enough to return. The bowl of strange harvest rests by your garden, glowing faintly, its scents rising like incense. You settle cross-legged on the stone floor, palms pressed to your knees, and feel the weight of what you've done. Eating bound you hear, but planting transformed the underworld into a place where bargains sprout like weeds. You sense it now, something larger than you, larger even than Hades, weaving itself into the soil. The shades linger at the edge, hushed, waiting for you to speak. You don't. You're listening, and there it is, the faint scrape of quill on parchment, not in this hall, but in the air of myth itself. Contracts are being drafted, lines set in invisible ink. The pomegranate seeds were only the preamble, the fruit of your garden writes the rest. Above, Demeter rages. She scours fields, strikes the earth barren, makes mortals tremble as granaries run dry. Mainstream historical fact slides in. Crop failures weren't abstract in ancient Greece. A bad harvest could mean starvation, migration, even revolt. Cities kept grain stores like lifeboats, praying the seas would allow trade to refill them. Historians still argue whether the myth of Persephone was an early allegory for these cycles, or whether the cycles were retold through the myth. Either way, the parallel is exact. Absence explained as hunger, return explained as bloom. You lean toward the soil and whisper, "She'll never stop searching." The roots shift under your hand, answering. They've already chosen sides, reaching down for the underworld's nutrients, reaching up for the memory of light. They are diplomats in miniature, ambassadors fluent in silence. Hades clears his throat. The sound is deliberate, awkward, like a man rehearsing how to start conversations after centuries of not bothering. "You belong," he says finally, voice flat but steady. You tilt your head. Belong? Not fully, not permanently, but enough that the garden thrives. You sense his unease. He knows Demeter will not relent, knows Zeus will be pulled into the drama, knows this small bed of soil is a chessboard for cosmic negotiation. You chuckle softly. Joke 1. So the universe's weather pattern boils down to shared custody paperwork. You imagine Zeus in a toga, stamping documents with a lightning-shaped notary seal. The mouse approves with a squeak that sounds suspiciously like a gavel bang. The blossoms glow more brightly as if overhearing your sarcasm and deciding to dramatize. Shades gasp. Hades looks away as if ignoring the obvious. The bargain is already taking root in everyone's minds. Half above, half below. Seasons carved from your footsteps. A year cut in two like a fruit cleaved open. You reach for a frost gold pod, break it in half, and offer one side to a shade, one side to yourself. The taste is both warmth and chill at once. That's how it will be, you murmur. Months with her, months with him. The shade nods, repeating the phrase in whispers that ripple outward through the crowd. Within minutes, the entire hall hums with it. The pact is becoming chorus. Quirky tidbit time. In some rural Greek villages well into the modern era, people still timed sowing and reaping with rituals to Persephone, speaking of her as Kor, the maiden. Farmers poured out libations, called her name, and trusted her rhythm more than the stars. You smile because your little underworld garden has become a cosmic farmer's almanac. Hades shifts again, discomfort obvious. He doesn't like deals decided without signatures. But even he must recognize that some contracts are oral, whispered in chorus, sealed by blossoms rather than wax. He mutters, "There must be order." You reply gently, "Order is what plants do. Seed, sprout, fruit, die, return. That's order." The shades hum louder and the soil warms under your knees. Historians still argue whether the myth suggests Persephone was tricked into compromise or whether she wielded power by accepting it. Sitting here you suspect both. Compromise and power are rarely clean. You sigh. Joke 2. At least nobody suggested joint Zoom custody visits. The shades don't get it, but the mouse chuckles knowingly, tail tapping like a loading icon. The fruit bowl gleams. You arrange the harvest into two groups. Warm memories for Demeter's months. Cool shadows for Hades. The division feels inevitable, natural. Balance, not choice. You mark the bowls with scratches on wood, simple symbols you'll recognize when the cycles repeat. You realize with a pang, this will repeat. It isn't a one-time deal, it's forever. You stand, brushing soil from your knees. The shades bow as if you've just signed a treaty. Hades inclines his head, the tiniest gesture of concession. The blossoms sway, as though agreeing. And you, Persephone, or the you the story insists upon, accept. Joke 3 comes unbidden, weary and wry. Congratulations, you've just invented winter vacation. The blossom chime faintly as if in applause. The pact is not yet written in thunder or decree, but it lives already in the garden, in the fruit, in the shared whispers of the dead. Months above, months below. A bargain rooted not in paper, but in seeds. Word travels upward along cracks in the earth you can't see, through roots, through riverbeds, through the breath of travellers who swear they heard a bell ring underground. By the time it reaches the fields, mortals already feel it in their bones. You can almost hear them noticing the pattern you've made with your garden and your choices. When you're gone, things go still. When you return, everything loosens like soil after rain. They don't know the details, only the rhythm. Still, rhythm is enough to build a life around. You picture a village waking into a lean season. The wheat stubble stands rough, the olive trees sigh as if they're older than time, and people wrap their cloaks tighter. Someone lights a hearth with last season's kindling. Someone else counts the jars of barley and mutters numbers like prayers. A mother presses her palm to a child's head and says, "It's the month she's below." The child nods solemnly, as if you've personally signed the homework. In this way, the story of you becomes practical. It's not just myth, it's the calendar hanging invisibly on every wall. A mainstream historical fact plants itself in your thoughts. In classical Athens, the civic year was divided into lunar months with names that mirrored agricultural and religious rhythms. Bodromion for harvest festivals, Anthesterion for new wine. People knew when to sow, when to reap, when to rest, because the months arrived braided with ritual. Even if a cloud hid the moon, the festivals announced the turn. Historians still argue whether those rituals shaped farming schedules, or simply blessed what farmers already did. But the pairing was firm. In winter, when Demeter mourned, fields lay quiet. In spring, when you returned, they rustled. You lean on the garden frame, listening to the noise of human days as if the stones were radio. A pair of brothers argue over whether to mend the plough or gamble that the old yoke will hold one more season. Their father scratches lines in dust, furrow plans, then harvest shares, then debts paid back in oil instead of coin. The family dog sleeps through the math. The smell of yesterday's stew clings to air, and in that smell is resignation with a pinch of hope. The yearly recipe. You recognise it. Your garden pulses agreement. Above the village, a hillside sanctuary waits cold and dignified. Someone climbs the steps with a basket of dried figs and a little flask of wine. This person is not a priest, not a noble, just a neighbour who mutters, "For core," and tips a few drops onto the stone. They aren't certain if you'll hear. They do it anyway. That's how mortals make sense of bigger shapes. They offer small, repeatable gestures until those gestures become reality. You remember the festivals you already touched in echoes. The Thesmophoria's strange compost magic. The torches of Eleusis. Now you feel another. Proorosia. The before ploughing rite. When communities ask Demeter to bless fields before the first cut. Quirky tidbit arrives hand in hand. Farmers sometimes buried little terracotta pigs or mini ploughshares at field edges as luck tokens. A DIY charm kit against drought and mischief. You smile at the thriftiness. Even their superstitions had scale. A child later digs one up, squints, and declares it a toy for the household mouse. The mouse in your hall, your whiskered maitre d' would approve. Markets pivot with the seasons. When you are below, stalls fill with salted fish, dried figs, a new weave of wool, things that last and warm. When you return, greens appear, then young goatskins full of sour new cheese, then early cherries they sell with convincing lies about sweetness. Joke 1. Somewhere a vendor swears his olives can cure heartbreak and taxes. 2 bites in, you're still paying both, but you feel better about the olives. Mortals cope through commerce and comedy. The pairing is very stable. Sailors watch the winds because grain ships matter. In the lean months, they scan the horizon for hulls riding low. Cargo holds fat with wheat from the Black Sea. A harbour official idly carves tally marks into a post while poetising about favourable breezes. The poem isn't great, but the tally is. A city lives by numbers as much as by myths. You think again of Demeter's rage written across the sea lanes. Your chest tightens. You plant your palm on the soil until the ache becomes a steady drumbeat. Leave, return, leave, return. A contract in pulse. At home, someone flips a spindle and hums. Another person scrapes a pot and lets the scraps fall to a clay dish for dogs and spirits alike. Children rattle knucklebones in a corner. Little lamb astragali rolling across a worn threshold. They're supposed to be playing odds, but one child declares the bones are fortune tellers and asks the throw whether Kor will come back early this year. The bones arrange themselves like a tiny constellation. She's bringing flowers, the child interprets, because children are the best kind of biased. Joke 2. The village skeptic rolls eyes so hard they nearly plough a furrow. The winter isn't one note, it's a chord. Some mornings glitter, some sulk. Some days smell like smoke and onion. Others like wet wool and impatience. The men argue about whether to mend nets or roofs first. The women decide, as they often do, by simply doing the more urgent task. Bread comes smaller, soup stretch longer, stories get better. The myth of you swells in the telling. On one porch you hover at the threshold with a torch. On another you plant a secret herb in the king's hall and smile with half your mouth. Accuracy loses to usefulness. No one minds. In the city, philosophers debate whether all change is circular and whether circles are perfect or just efficient. One quotes the Pythagoreans about harmony and movement. Another mutters about necessity. A third peers too closely at a pomegranate at market and gets chewed out by the seller for fondling the merchandise. Historians still argue whether your story borrowed from older cycles, Inanna's descent, Ishtar's gates, or whether Greeks mapped their own weather onto a familiar plot. You shrug and tend your bed. Influence in myth is like compost in soil, everything broken down feeding everything new. When spring noses in, mortals don't need an oracle, they smell it. Loam softer, the sea less mean, time deciding to be time again. A girl ties a red and white thread around her wrist for luck. The Marti custom neighbours across the sea practice too, and stands in the doorway daring the sun to find her shy. Men check the oxen's hooves and pronounce them adequate with the confidence of people who will fix whatever breaks later. Someone laughs too loud at nothing. It sounds like the first fruit in your bowl that tasted like door opening. You rise from your crouch and picture the first cut of plough into field, the earth curling back like a page, the seed bag's familiar weight slung from a shoulder. There's music in that work, the squeak of axle, the creak of leather, the steady snort of animal breath. The man walking the furrow thinks of his father's hands and his son's hands and decides, for today he's strong enough. When the plough turns at the end, it traces that old boustrophodon path, ox turning, just like early Greek writing once did, lines back and forth. The field reads itself in both directions, and you recognise the pattern, down and up, below and above, Hades and Demeter. The alphabet of your life is planted in soil. Festivals wake fully. Torches again at Eleusis. Someone drops theirs and stomps the sparks and laughs, embarrassed. The Kykeon cup passes hand to hand, not your fruits, but kin to their purpose. People sip, not for intoxication, but for belonging. Joke 3. One over-enthusiastic initiate declares the barley drink notes of meadow with a finish of please add honey, and the priest glares. But later, he adds honey. Even solemn rites learn from good taste. Your garden listens to all of this and translates it into pulse and glow. The shades lean in at the perimeter, soothed by the buzz of lives continuing. They like the winter noise above. Footsteps, repairs, jokes thick as soup. They like the spring noise more. When your season to rise approaches, the blossoms shiver the way a harbour does when sails dot the line between sea and sky. Hades notices. You don't look at him. Both of you understand the logic, even if neither of you asked for it. The mouse sits at the bed's corner like a tiny harbour master, whiskers measuring wind. Mortals don't see your throne room, your awkward hardware store king, your mouse. They don't need to. They trace you in bread and thread, in furrows and festivals, in taxes paid in oil, and stories traded for warmth. When you rise, they'll say the world remembered itself. When you descend, they'll say it's time to store and mend. Your absence and return make sense not because everyone agrees about belief, but because everyone agrees about dinner. You breathe with them, above and below, an inhale and exhale stretched into months. The pattern holds. It's not cruel. It's not kind. It's what a garden knows. Rest, root, reach, fruit, and then fold back so the next reach has room. The shades hum. The soil warms your hand. Somewhere a child ties another red and white thread and whispers, "Come back soon." You plan to. That's the promise hidden in every seed. The blossoms sway lazily in their courtyard, pulsing light as if nodding in time with the question stirring in your chest. You've made a garden. You've swallowed seeds. And now the underworld feels less like exile and more like a contract written in petals. Still, the silence between root and bloom leaves a room for doubt, and you fill that silence with what-ifs. You lean on the soil frame, chin resting on folded arms, and whisper the thought you've tried to avoid. Was this choice yours? Above, Demeter rages because she insists it wasn't. To her, you were taken. devoured by shadows, dragged into a life you never requested. But here, with soil under your nails and blossoms glowing like lanterns, you can't shake the sense that you've shaped this place with your own hands. Historians still argue over this. Was the myth of Persephone about abduction, about feminine vulnerability in a patriarchal world, or was it an initiation story, a transformation that marked your passage into authority? Some texts cast you as passive, a victim. Others hint that you ate those seeds knowingly, choosing roots as well as sunlight. The debates echo louder than the shade's whispers, and you sigh because even gods get caught in mortal scholarship. You pluck one fruit from the bowl, a small frost-coloured orb, and turn it in your fingers. It hums faintly, resonant with uncertainty. You nibble. The taste is hesitation itself, half-formed words, a door only halfway shut, the rustle of a letter never sent. You laugh softly, joke one. Congratulations, you just invented the flavour of every group text where no one answers for 3 hours. Even the mouse squeaks like it's been left on red. You think of Demeter again. She gave you a world of abundance, of wheat golden as braids, of harvest festivals swollen with food and laughter. But her love carried its own chains, the expectation that you'd never leave, never falter, never carve out a season of your own. Was her control gentler than Hades' shadows? Maybe, maybe not. You roll the fruit seed on your tongue and admit the truth. Love doesn't always ask permission, even when it means well. Across the hall, Hades sits in stillness. You glance at him and wonder about his motives. Was he lonely? Strategic? Did he drag you down because he saw a partner, or because he saw leverage? You think of the awkward jars of compost, the reed coils, the quiet gifts that appeared whenever you needed them. That doesn't erase the violence of the chariot bursting from earth, but it complicates the picture. Love here too doesn't ask permission. It hides behind silence, showing itself in sideways offerings. The shades shuffle, murmuring. One steps forward, braver than most, and asks, "Did you want this?" You don't answer immediately. You crouch, tracing lines in the soil, weighing the roots beneath your fingertips. Finally you say, "Want is complicated, but choice lives in what I plant." The shade nods, satisfied, and drifts back. You exhale, relieved. Sometimes not answering is the best answer. Quirky tidbit. In some Orphic versions of your myth, Persephone isn't merely abducted. She's also mother to Zagreus, a shadowy child of the Underworld whose fragments play into later Dionysian tales. Some scholars see in this a hint of female power retained even in darkness. Others call it narrative sprawl. You chuckle, joke too, leave it to myth to add bonus DLC content no one asked for. Your garden rustles as if agreeing. Fruits dangle, blossoms tremble, and the shades hum with an energy that feels like debate itself. The Underworld has become a symposium of uncertainty. Maybe that's the point. Humans, gods, spirits. All of them trying to stitch meaning from threads that won't stay still. You lie back on the stone floor, staring up at the false constellations in the crystal-veined ceiling. They sparkle faintly, and you imagine they're listening. You whisper to them, "Was it love? Was it trick? Was it necessity?" They don't answer, of course, but the blossoms brighten once, dim once, as if to say, maybe all three. Maybe contradictions don't cancel. They coexist. The mouse curls beside your elbow, tail twitching. You scratch its fur absently and smile. Joke 3. Out of all the mythic sidekicks, I get a rodent. At least it's consistent. The mouse pretends to be offended, then leans into your hand anyway. You let your breathing slow, eyelids heavy. The soil beneath you thrums with its quiet pulse. The blossoms chime faintly, and the shades drift like tidewater beyond the boundary. Love, trick, necessity. The debate may never end. But for tonight, lying in a throne room turned greenhouse, you decide not to answer. Some stories are true or unfinished. The blossoms lean toward you as if waiting for a verdict, but you offer none. Instead, you stretch your fingers across the soil, tracing idle circles until the dirt clings to your nails like ink. The garden hums faintly, and you realize something startling. This small patch of earth has already outgrown its role as decor. It's becoming a symbol, a story in itself, one mortals and shades alike will carry long after petals wither. You sit upright and study the fruits you've sorted, warm ones for Demeter's hearth, cool ones for Hades. Each looks ordinary until it glows, then it becomes emblematic. You imagine them painted on pottery, woven into cloth, whispered into bedtime stories. The seeds you pressed into soil are no longer just seeds, they're metaphors sprouting on both sides of the divide. The underworld has never been fertile in myth, and yet here it is, blooming contradictions that mortals above will turn into explanations for their own lives. Mainstream historical fact flits in. Scholars note that Persephone's myth underpinned the Eleusinian Mysteries, one of the longest-running religious rites in the ancient Mediterranean. Initiates were promised a gentler fate after death, as if your descent and return soften mortality itself. The mysteries thrived for nearly 2,000 years, drawing philosophers, emperors, farmers, and poets. And yet, what exactly happened in those rites remains hidden, because silence was their price of entry. Historians still argue whether the mysteries offered literal visions, or simply the profound relief of shared secrecy. Either way, your seeds sprouted into the longest-lasting cult in the Greek world. Not bad for a midnight garden in the underworld. You pluck one of the frost gold pods, hold it up, and squint. To you, it's a fruit. To mortals, it will be an emblem. Winter, famine, patience. You picture a mother telling her children, "When core goes below, the world rests. When she rises, so do we." The children roll their eyes, but they remember. Later, they'll teach it again. That's how symbols work. They're less about belief than about rhythm. Quirky tidbit arrives. In certain versions of the myth, Persephone isn't even reluctant. She becomes queen of the underworld with authority over curses, oaths, and the afterlife's rules. Some inscriptions invoke her directly, asking her to punish or protect. Your seeds may have been more than fruit. They may have been a coronation gift in disguise. You laugh softly. Joke 1. So my resume reads, florist, gardener, queen, enforcer of cosmic contracts. That's a LinkedIn no one's endorsing. The mouse wiggles its nose like it just clicked connect to the Shades Watch. Reverent. They seem to understand that your sprouts have crossed into allegory. A few begin whispering prayers, not to Hades, not to Zeus, but to you. The blossoms answer with a shimmer, and you realise they've been waiting for this moment. Not just to feed memory, but to reshape meaning. You murmur, symbols are seeds too. The soil vibrates in agreement. Above, Demeter continues her bargaining. You feel her pacing sanctuaries, her presence stamped into temples like boot prints that never fade. Farmers scatter barley, hoping for mercy. Politicians promise sacrifices to soothe her. Sailors pray at harbour altars, hoping grain ships will dock before famine sharpens. They don't know your little underworld plot exists, but they act as if it does, interpreting every season through its logic. Your private bed has become a public calendar. You sigh and brush dirt from your hands. The fruit bowl gleams, and you imagine some future poet describing it not as produce but as oracle, each piece a fragment of fate. In centuries to come, tragedians will stage your story in amphitheatres, voices booming about cycles of death and rebirth. Historians still argue whether audiences actually believed or simply appreciated the metaphor. Either way, you'll be there in their words, a garden woven into verse. The blossoms pulse brighter, reacting to your thoughts, and you whisper, "This is how myths grow." You don't need to push the phrase hard, it's already true. Seeds in soil, seeds in language, both sprout crooked and luminous. Joke 2 lands as you stand, stretching your back. I wanted a hobby garden, and I accidentally invented anthropology. The shades murmur approval, though one looks confused, perhaps not sure what anthropology is. You wave it off. Some jokes are ahead of their time. You walk slowly along the bed, fingertips grazing the blossoms. Each glow seems to translate into a different metaphor. Hope, patience, return, inevitability. You don't control which symbol sprouts, you just tend the conditions. That realization is oddly freeing. You don't have to explain yourself to mortals or gods. You just have to water, wait, and let stories root where they will. Quieter now, you kneel and press your palms flat against the soil. It hums with warmth, and for a moment you imagine every root stretching upward, not toward light, but toward imagination. The shades sigh, lulled. You close your eyes and think, this is bigger than me. For once, that doesn't feel frightening. It feels inevitable, like a fruit ripening. The mouse curls on your lap, tail twitching in dream. You stroke its fur absently and smile. Joke 3. Some people get loyal dogs, I get an Underworld mouse as my brand ambassador. The mouse snores. Apparently it accepts the role. You open your eyes. The blossoms glow steadily now, not just for you, not just for Hades or Demeter, but for mortals above and shades below. Seeds have become symbols. Symbols have become myth. And myth, like any good garden, will keep reseeding itself long after the gardener moves on. You linger at the garden's edge until the glow thins to a breath, until even the mouse decides to fold its whiskers and nap like a curled comma at the end of a long sentence. The hall behind you is a hush with architecture. Stone practicing its vowels, shadows keeping time. You run the rake's teeth lightly through one corner of soil, not to change anything, just to hear the soft scratch that says, still here, still growing, even when no one is watching. The shades have retreated to their dim perimeters, satisfied for now. Their absence feels like tide going out, a faint glassy pull along your ribs. You listen to the quiet it leaves and realise it isn't empty. It's stocked with roots and promises. Hades remains on the throne, a silhouette made of patience. You sense he will not move first. That's his specialty. Guarding thresholds, keeping ledgers, letting others define the shape of the moment. You decide you won't move first either. The stalemate is oddly comfortable, like two cats pretending the same sunspot isn't already spoken for. Joke 1, softly purring. You set the little reed coil back on its step, touch the bowl where dew mist gathers, and straighten the scratches that label your fruits. Warm for the months above, cool for the months below. You can feel the hinge inside you, that click between seasons. Subtle, sure, the way a door learned to swing without complaining. When you go, the garden will go on. It doesn't need your eyes to be true. It needs your rhythm, and rhythm can travel. A thread of air stirs, not wind exactly, more like a tension changing direction. You can almost hear footsteps far away, the measured stride of a goddess who has not slept, who has counted drought in handfuls of grain and decided she is done counting. Demeter is coming. You don't stand, you do not rush. This is not a reunion made of sprint and crash. It is a reunion paced like harvest, deliberate, careful, the kind of joy that remembers the cost and pays it anyway. Mainstream fact slips in with the imagined footsteps. On coins from ancient Syracuse, core Persephone appears crowned with grain, her profile bright as a minted moon, proof that entire cities once banked on your cycle. Harvest, famine, harvest again. Those coins changed hands in markets thick with olives and argument. They were a portable myth. You wonder if any trader ever rubbed a thumb across your face before a risky voyage, a tiny blessing carried past capes that like to rearrange boats. The thought steadies you. A glimmer near the ceiling reminds you of the asphodel meadows described in Homer, the place of ordinary souls. The crystals catch your garden's light and scatter it in pale sparks, and for a heartbeat the hall feels like that meadow, not sorrowful, just level, a long field where no one hurries. Quirky tidbit, real asphodel, yes a plant, has roots that can be roasted. Some ancient writers thought it suitable food for poor households and the dead alike, a humble bridge plant. Historians still argue whether Homer's asphodel matches the species we label today, or was a poet's placeholder for the kind of flower you see when everything else has quieted. You decide the argument is charming and unsolvable, which is why scholars love it and gardens ignore it. You walk the bed one more time, fingertips grazing leaves that now know your pulse. A few blossoms answer with tiny chimes, the polite good night of a nursery with excellent manners. You can feel the story tapering to its soft edge. Even jokes grow drowsy here. You think of the crocodile dung sunscreen you vowed never to try and grin. You've earned one last callback to ridiculousness before the fade. Joke 2. SPF Underworld. Protects against zero suns, guaranteed. The mouse's tail twitches, which is legally laughter. Hades clears his throat, the smallest thunder. The roots are sufficient, he says, which is king speak for excellent. You incline your head. The fruit keeps its word, you reply, which is gardener speak for trust. The two statements cross in the middle and clasp hands without spectacle. It's not romance in the singing sense, not triumph with trumpets. but it is an accord. And accords are what empires dream of and gardens do. Shadows fold at the doorway. Not menace, not messenger, simply the corridor remembering how to receive. You sense the path upward stirring, the way a well remembers rope, bucket, hands. The bargain, months above, months below, settles across your shoulders like a shawl you've worn enough to forget it's there. It isn't heavy, it isn't light, it's yours. You turn to your audience of nearly nothings, shades in their rows of quiet, and lift a palm. Attend the garden, you say, with your whispers, not your worry. They bow, a rustling like leaves that never existed. You set 3 fruits aside for them: wheat memory, iron and spring, door opening, because generosity is the only currency that gains interest in a place with no clocks. The mouse sits beside the offering like a clerk who will absolutely keep the ledger honest. Joke 3. United in your head, Sir Whisker, first of the larder. From the above world drift the ordinary heralds of your return, the crack snap of frost surrendering its last claim on a fieldstone, the startled shout of a fisherman who notices he's singing again, the way a temple bell rings not louder but clearer. A mainstream thread hums with them, the Eleusinian torchlight that once guided feet in autumn and spring, century after century, until late emperors and sharp-edged decrees shuttered the rites. The rites stopped. The rhythm did not. Grain still rose. Stories still braided themselves. Not all closures end the thing that made them necessary. You bow to the throne, not low, not servile, simply level. Hades' nod is a shadow dipping, all the approval he'll allow himself. You place the rake handle down in its rack, align the coil, straighten the bowl. The garden likes tidy, the Underworld does too, because tidy gives rest a place to sit. Time thins. The hall grows wider by becoming softer. You hold the bed in your gaze the way you hold a word on your tongue to keep it from dissolving. Sleep, you tell it. Green dreams. The light obeys, easing from glow to promise. Then, with the quiet dignity of a page turned by breath, you face the corridor. Steps will follow. Stone will accept them. The seam of worlds will crease and smooth. But for one heartbeat more you remain. Gardener, queen, hinge. The person who learned that darkness isn't the opposite of growth, only its different grammar. When you go, the grammar stays. When you return, the sentence picks up where you left off. And somewhere above, a door opens. Not slammed, not flung, simply opened, as if the season itself remembered your name. The glow of the garden settles into a soft, even hush, and the hall becomes a long breath held kindly. Petals fold, not because they are commanded, but because the hour asks them to rest. In that dim, forgiving light, edges blur. Stone looks like velvet. Distance feels like a gentle arm around your shoulders. You take that last look the way travellers do, once for the path, once for the place. Then let your gaze unfocus until the shapes turn to comfort. The corridor ahead is patient. It doesn't hurry you. It widens, inviting your steps to become slower, longer, easier. Each footfall lands like felt on felt, sound swallowed by a room that understands what sleep is for. The mouse resettles in its corner nest, a curled comma again, and even the shades lean back as if chairs have appeared just behind their knees. Hades rests his hands on the throne's arms, not gripping now, only holding, like someone remembering how to set a heavy book down without a thud. You let your shoulders lower. The air is cool and steady, a temperature that never forgets itself. When you inhale, you gather up the small signatures of this place. Mineral sweetness, the quiet musk of damp earth, the faint, clean note of water folded in stone. When you exhale, the room answers by becoming a little dimmer, a little softer, as if it has leaned in to hear the shape of your breath and decided to match it. Above, very far, a field rolls under moonlight that chooses gentleness over display. The line between worlds thins like silk pulled smooth over a table. You don't need to go yet. You don't need to stay. The comfort is in knowing that both movements can be calm. Roots do this. Reach down, release a little, reach again. So do tides. So do thoughts as they slip from waking into that kind of sleep that keeps the lamp of awareness burning low, a nightlight left on in a good room. Your garden keeps that light for you now. It hums without asking you to listen, glows without asking you to look. You could name the blossoms again, count the fruits, rehearse the pact, but none of that wants your attention. What does is small. The way your hands feel warm from work, the way your jaw loosens, the way your eyes grow heavy at the edges first, then in the centre, like dusk arriving in rings across a lake. You let it happen. If a thought rises, it comes as reassurance rather than question. Cycles hold, seeds know, returns are built into departures. The line repeats, slower each time, words stretching out into soft threads that float and then settle. Even memory rests, filing itself neatly, so the garden inside your head can sprout without rustle or rush. The last thing left is a kindness you offer yourself, permission to drift. It is accepted on your behalf by soil, by stone, by the small bright confidences of leaves. The hall dims once more, not to darkness, but to the colour of closed eyes. The story closes with you and continues with you, because that is what good stories and good sleep agree to do. Sweet dreams.